Hey, what's going on everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at a really interesting mini gaming PC with discrete graphics known as the G1. This is coming to us from a company known as Acemagic, and in the past I've taken a look at one of their other mini PCs. But with that, we didn't have discrete graphics, so we did have to rely on an iGPU. But with their G1 line, we get a dedicated GPU built in, and we've still got a really small form factor PC here. And really what makes this mini PC so interesting is the GPU they opted to use. I've actually tested this same GPU in a desktop system. I have not seen it in a mobile variant, but with this we get the Radeon RX 6400. It's definitely not a top of the line card, but it will offer much better performance than an iGPU, even if we were talking about the newer RDNA 3 iGPUs. And inside of the box, along with the Acemagic G1 mini PC, we get a stand so we can set this thing up vertically on our desk. We also have a 6-foot HDMI cable and a 180 watt power supply here, which should be plenty for the CPU and GPU combo they came up with. Once the stand's installed, I really do like the way this thing looks. Now, unfortunately, it's really hard to set this thing horizontally. There's no feet that come along with it. And over here on the right-hand side, we do have the RGBX. So this will kind of cycle through the RGB colors while it's up and running. And around back, we've got easy access to a ton of I/O here, given how small this PC really is. And speaking of I/O, up front here, we've got a full-size USB 3.0 port, audio in, audio out with those dual 3.5mm audio jacks, and USB Type-C. This is actually USB Type-C 3.2, so it will support display out. Moving around back, we've got our power input, another USB 3.2 port, 2 more audio jacks, 4 USB 3.0 ports, dual gigabit Ethernet ports, full-size HDMI, full-size DisplayPort, and we've got a little ejection button up top there that'll allow us to get the side panel off really easily so we can upgrade the RAM and storage. We will do a bit of a teardown in just a second, but when it comes to the specs, they opted to use the AMD Ryzen 7 5800H, and with this we get 8 cores, 16 threads. Remember, this is based on Zen 3, but it does offer some decent performance, especially when you pair it up with a dedicated GPU. It's got a base clock of 3.3 GHz and a boost up to 4.4. You can add up to 64 GB of DDR4 at 3200 MHz in this in dual channel, but with this setup, I've got 32 gigs pre-installed. A 512 GB NVMe SSD, so we have a total of 2 M.2 slots in this unit. And of course, for the GPU, we've got that AMD Radeon RX 6400. 4 GB of GDDR6 VRAM. It'll clock up to 2321 MHz. We also have Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2 with this unit. And for this, I'm going to be running Windows 11. But before we jump into the testing, I wanted to give you a look at the internals because the way they've got this set up is pretty interesting. Now, over here on this side, we do have that button that'll allow us to eject this side so we can easily access both of those M.2 slots and our RAM, so we can upgrade really easily over here. Not much else going on over here, but we do have access to that RGBX that's on the side of the unit. You can unplug it if you want to disable it. But moving over to the other side, we've got a lot more going on. As you can see, this has a massive cooler, and that's because it needs to cool that RX 6400 and the 5800H. All of the RX 6400s that I've ever seen are for desktops, but this seems to be kind of an integrated RX 6400. I'm not sure if this was a custom board specifically designed by Acemagic or not, but that cooling system is really beefy, even for the specs we have here. It's going to stay nice and quiet the way it is, even with that single fan. And there's also another fan header here in case you wanted to add an extra fan. You could always do it. Plus, we've got a hidden display port inside of this unit on the board, which was really odd if you ask me. Okay, so here it is. Had some time to mess around with this little machine, and overall it's actually a pretty decent performer. Obviously, we've got that RX 6400, so we're not going to be doing any 4K, but there's a lot of stuff that runs pretty well at 1080p. As you can see, we've got that 5800H, and this is running at up to 64 watts here. 32 gigabytes of DDR4 at 3200 MHz. And of course, the Radeon RX 6400 with 4 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM. Taking a quick look at GPU-Z, this is actually running at X4 3.0 instead of X4 4.0, which will hurt performance a bit on the 6400, not by too much, and we do get kind of a boost clock up to around 2300 MHz in some cases. And from everything that I've seen so far while testing this system, the TDP on that RX 6400 maxes out at around 37 watts. And overall, the whole system is really snappy, so if you did want to use this as your everyday PC, you've got more than enough power. 4K video playback works out great here, even on just the iGPU if you wanted to do it that way. Video editing at around 1080p, photo editing, web browsing, email checking. This has more than enough power for your everyday needs, but what we're really worried about here is gaming performance with the G1. And the first thing I did here was just run a few benchmarks, and then we'll jump right into some game testing. First up, we've got Geekbench 5, and we've seen the 5800H in the past. Remember, this runs at up to 64 watts, single core 1906, multi 8201. 3D Mark Night Raid 31,466, and to tell you the truth, I thought we'd see a much higher score here. But on the graphics side, I mean, it's definitely beaten out the RDNA 3 iGPUs like the 780M. It's just not a much higher score that I kind of expected it would be. And finally, Firestrike, and this is looking more like it, coming in with a 10,226. So with those benchmarks out of the way, let's move over to some real-world gaming. And the first one on the list here is Cyberpunk 2077. We're at 1080p, low settings, and we're just using the preset. I didn't go through and lower everything all the way down like I do with the iGPUs. And with this here, we've actually got an average of 82 FPS. It feels really good. Locking this down at 60 would be the way to go on this RX 6400. And you know, locked down at 60 with some settings at medium, we could definitely do it. But I did run into a little bit of an issue here with Spider-Man Miles Morales. Ever since the RX 6400 released for desktops, I've always had issues with this specific game. Well, Miles Morales and Spider-Man Remastered. Right now, we're at 1080p low, and we can get an average of around 56 FPS. It's not horrible, and I'd say it'd be playable like this, but I wanted to see if we could get 60 out of it. So what I did here was drop it down to 900p, and as you can see, performance falls right on its face. We're actually getting worse performance at 900p as opposed to 1080. And this has kind of been the case with these games in the RX 6400 for a little while now. I definitely wanted to test one of my favorite games, OG Skyrim. We're at 1080p, high, and we may even be able to go up to very high. If you take a look at Afterburner, we are pulling up to 36 watts from that GPU, but it's not maxing that clock out. And as for the CPU, which this game is very CPU intensive, we've only hit around 13 watts maximum with the 5800H. Next on the list, we've got Forza Horizon 5, and this is one of those games that does work really well on a lot of different systems. Lower-end GPUs actually perform really well with this. And right now, we're at 1080p, high settings. We can get an average of around 84 FPS. More than playable if you ask me. I also wanted to test out the built-in benchmark for Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and right now we're at 1080p, medium settings with no resolution scale. We averaged 54 FPS. Taking it down to 900p will net us over 60, or we could add a little bit of resolution scale if we wanted to. And the final game I wanted to test here was Starfield. 900p, low settings. I've got an outdoor and an indoor test. Outdoors, as you can see, really drops down due to that render distance with this RX 6400. Now, we averaged 45 FPS here, but indoors, it will jump on up. That's just how it is with this game. And it's still a bit early. I know driver optimizations are on the way. We should see a nice little boost in performance, but I still don't think even at 900p in those outdoor long draw distance situations will run this at 60 FPS on the 6400. Another thing I always like to take a look at with these mini gaming PCs is just total system power consumption, and this one actually does a pretty good job. So I use a kilowatt meter, and while doing all of my tests, I can see exactly how much is pulling directly from the wall outlet. And at idle, with the iGPU disabled, we're strictly using that RX 6400. We pulled around 16 watts. Average gaming, 73 watts. And in my extreme test, we had a maximum of 121 watts, but under everyday normal use or even gaming, you won't see this kind of wattage being pulled. It's definitely an extreme test, and I knew that this would be pulling much more than most of the other mini PCs we take a look at with iGPUs because we do have that discrete RX 6400. So overall, I do like the design of the G1. I'm a big fan of these vertical standing mini PCs. I think they look really good. Cooling system here is excellent, and I wish we'd see more mini PC manufacturers just kind of add an overkill cooler. It's got plenty to keep that 5800H and that RX 6400 cool, and it's nice and quiet also, even with just a single fan design. But obviously, the GPU here does leave a little more to be desired for a mini gaming PC. Now, it's much better than iGPU powered mini PCs on the market, but it would have been nice to have something like an RX 6600 instead of the 6400. But either way, I think it's a pretty cool little setup. If you're interested in learning more, I will leave some links in the description. You can head over to the official Acemagic website, and if there's anything else you want to see running on this system, just let me know in the comments below. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. Like always, thanks for watching.